Hello, how are you doing? I meant to film a reading wrap-up video last week, but I had a bit of a cold, which I'm only now just at the tail end of, so I wasn't really feeling up to it at the time. But I want to discuss all of the books that I read over the month of June, and I would love to hear if you have also read any of these books and what you think about them, or if you want to let me know about anything else that you read over the past month. So I feel like I read less in July than I normally do, because for almost 2 weeks of the month I was on holiday, and I always think that on holiday I'll do more reading than I do, but because we did a bit of a road trip around southern France and the Provence region, and I was having fun, spending time with my partner, it didn't do as much as I was hoping to, or as much as the books that I brought along with me, though I did do some, and I did do some reading aloud to him, and also went to a couple of fun literary locations. So I read a bit of Edith Wharton's autobiography called A Backward Glance, because I was hoping that there would be some sections of this book which were set at a place called the Castel Saint-Clair, which is just north of the city of Hyères, which is right on the Mediterranean in southern France. And that was the residence of Edith Wharton for a number of years later on in her life. But I think she hadn't moved there, but when she wrote this at that point, she had visited there sometimes, because she does mention visiting this place, but or maybe she wrote this while she was there, so didn't feel the need to talk about it while she was there. She does discuss a bit of living in Paris in this memoir, but yeah, I was mainly looking for references to living in France while she was there than reading the book as a whole, so I just read some bits of sections, but it was interesting to hear about like her socializing and moving to different places, and the different social groups that she was moving amongst during that time, and feelings about her own literary reputation. But Castel Saint-Clair is a really beautiful place. It's quite high up on a mountain, and so it was really great to see this place. You can't actually go into the building because it's just used as like offices, and so it's sort of closed off to the public, but the surrounding area is a public park that you can walk around, and part of this is as gardens that she helps cultivate and maintain. So yeah, it was really lovely to walk around this area. And also there's this area with like a bit of a turret that you can walk up, and it has amazing views of Hyères and looking out at the Mediterranean. So that was really lovely to go to. Also, while I was in a city called Antibes, I went to a hotel called the Belle Reeves, which is a very fancy hotel, and it was the residence of F. Scott Fitzgerald and his wife Zelda for a period of time, and I think he wrote one of his novels while living there, but they're really capitalizing on this history of F. Scott Fitzgerald living there, because they have a number of very expensive cocktails that are named after books of his, and different Fitzgerald things, and they also run a literary award called the Prix Fitzgerald. And so while I was there having a drink, and I'd remembered that Joyce Carol Oates in June was posting about having been in France, and that she went there to collect an award. So I was like, I was wondering what award was it that she won, and when I looked it up, I saw it was actually the Prix Fitzgerald Award, and and there are photos of her collecting this award in the exact same spot where I was having this drink and looking up this information. So it was just a really fun coincidence, since Joyce Carol Oates is my favorite author, and it turned out she had just the month before received an award there. So I tweeted her about it, and she responded and remarked about how expensive the hotel was. But yeah, there was a display cabinet with some of past winners of the award, although a photo of Joyce Carol Oates wasn't included in there, and none of her books were either. So, but there, yeah, were a number of past winners, and it seems quite like random, the winners of this award, because last year's winner of 2023 was Quentin Tarantino. So yeah, all quite random. Anyway, those were just a couple of like fun literary things that I did. But while we were driving around this region of France, I started reading aloud to my partner Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout. This hasn't come out yet. It's being published in September, I think. And this is Elizabeth Strout's novel where all of the characters from her previous novels come together, especially Olive Kitteridge and what's the other, and Lucy Barton. I don't know why I always forget Lucy Barton's name when I start talking about this novel, which is ridiculous because Lucy Barton has been the central character of so many of Elizabeth Strout's novels that I've loved reading. But yeah, you get to see Lucy Barton meet Olive Kitteridge, and they have a number of exchanges where they tell each other's stories, and so it's so funny to see these very different characters interacting with each other. And it was so fun reading this aloud because I came up with different voices for both Lucy and Olive. And if you know their personalities, you know how my voice might have changed when reading out their dialogue. But also Bob Burgess, there's a lot of him in this novel. Elizabeth Strout's previous novel, The Burgess Boys, is so good, and he's appeared as a character in a number of Lucy Barton novels. And so it's so interesting seeing all these different characters come together, as well as a number of other characters from her previous novels. But there's also an overarching mystery in this novel, which takes place in Maine, of course, and follows the disappearance of an older woman, and her son who is living with her. Her adult son is suspected of being involved in this case, and Bob Burgess sort of takes on this case and defends the son. And so I'm about halfway through reading the book aloud. It's just finding time to be able to read it aloud to my partner and continue on with it. But I'm enjoying it so much. I mean, I worry that there's maybe too much going on with this book, with all of the interactions of the different characters and many different subplots of what's happening. And also there's a lot of summarizing of what's happened in previous books, in case you haven't read them, which it's sort of good that she's catching up the reader on that. But at the same time, it almost gets like a bit repetitive of like, remember, this thing happened in the past. But I enjoy her writing so much that I'm just completely drawn into it. And a really wonderful thing, she mentions in this novel the city of Saco in Maine, which is the city that I was raised in, and so yeah, there's a minor incident that occurs in Saco, and yeah, it was just so fun reading that name in this book and having that recognition. So yeah, I'm really enjoying this so much, and even more so for being able to dramatize it and give different voices to the different characters while reading it. Another novel that I'm currently reading and haven't finished reading, or that I started reading and stopped, and that I want to go back to, is The Lost Love Songs of Boysie Singh by Ingrid Persaud. And I didn't stop reading it because I wasn't enjoying it. I was enjoying it so much. But there are multiple characters in this novel too, and I feel like there was some other reading that I want to prioritize more, and so I went and was reading. I think it was a case of like reading too many books simultaneously, that I was starting to lose the thread of some of that, and I know that can happen to some of us readers sometimes who are less disciplined about only reading one book at a time, that if you're reading multiple books, it can start to feel a bit overwhelming. And so yeah, I was reading this along. I read about 150 pages of it. Look at the insides of it. It's so gorgeous. And yeah, I was really enjoying the many different female characters that are connected to this central character of Boysie Singh, who's kind of like a small-time gangster or crook, but also very much a ladies' man. And so he has affairs with a number of different women, and we get many of their voices in this book. But as it was going along, I was starting to lose the thread of who is who, and felt I wanted to go back and start at the beginning, so I had a stronger sense of it. but I am enjoying this novel so much because the way Ingrid Persaud creates these voices and of these different characters, they just like come alive. They have such strong personalities and are filled with Caribbean inflections, and that is such a pleasure to read about, but is also like slightly challenging because it's slightly foreign to me. So it takes me a while to sort of get into the rhythm of their speech and the cadence of their narrative. But once I get into it, I enjoy it so much. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to returning to this because it's so interesting getting many different perspectives on this single person. They have very different feelings about them. Some are more sympathetic to him, some are more critical of him, and he has been tried as a criminal, and so we know that he's been involved in this scandalous case, and we kind of follow in the lead up towards that. And it's so interesting how she builds up this overarching story while giving us the voices of all these really different lively women. And so yeah, I'm looking forward to going back and rereading the section I started and finishing this book because yeah, I think it is so well done. I also read the novel Clean by Alia Trabucco Zeran, translated by Sophie Hughes, and this is a Chilean novel that is so gripping and thrilling because the central premise of this novel is there's a woman who has worked as a cook and a housekeeper and nanny to a well-to-do family in Santiago. But she, in the beginning, she tells us that she is locked in a room and she is speaking to whoever might be on the other side of the wall and wants to tell them the story of her life and her experiences working for this family because the daughter of the family has been found dead. And we don't know if she was murdered, if this narrator was involved in that, or if the parents were involved or somebody else was involved, or if it was an accidental death. We just know that she has died. And she says that she's going to tell the story of what happened to her, but she has a very circuitous way of getting to of what happened, because time for her is like slightly distorted in her mind, or she doesn't have like a linear way of thinking about things. And more than this central mystery and tension of what happened to this girl is the mystery about this woman herself, and her very solitary life working for this family, of working 6 days a week, of really being at their beck and call, and being mistreated sometimes by them. And so we get her perspective so strongly, but at the same time we're aware that there are social and political like rumblings occurring within the city and the larger country, and sort of disturbances going on the outside, and this sort of adds to this sense of tension of what's going on. But also her descriptions of the domestic workings of this household have this kind of sinister undertone to them that add to the overall suspense of the novel. So yeah, it's really gripping to read, but also she is a very charismatic individual, that it's just like fun to hear about her perspective, but also really heart-wrenching because she becomes so lonely and so isolated, and just really this like quiet solitary presence in this household of this fairly well-to-do couple and their daughter, and is more like a parent to the daughter, but is also very much a servant of the household, so is mistreated by the daughter at some point, and she drops these little hints of think like, oh, maybe she was involved with the girl's death, or maybe the parents were involved in the girl's death, and so really like racks up the tension in that way. So I feel like this was written almost like as a more like commercial book and like thriller, but I feel like it does have this like social message to it of looking at economic imbalances and the way that servants are treated in households. It reminded me very much of Leila Slimani's novel Lullaby, which sort of deals with is also like a thriller, but also like deals with more social issues in this way. And Alia Trabucco's Zeran, she's been longlisted for the International Booker Prize before and has won literary prizes before. So very much has like a social conscience to her writing, but also has written really effective suspenseful novel. I think so. I really enjoyed reading this. So if you're looking for something to read in Women Translation Month in August, I'd really highly recommend this new novel. And I also read with my online book club the really long novel. This is partly why I didn't read more things in July, because this novel is so long and really involved. But Caledonian Road by Andrew O'Hagan. And we had so much great discussion about this and very different opinions about it from different book club members, where some members really loved it, thought it was really effective and moving. Others felt very mixed about it, and some gave up on reading it because they really weren't enjoying it. So this is a novel with so many characters, and we see in the very beginning there's a whole cast of characters on 2 pages, giving descriptions of all these many different characters living in London in 2021 and their various interactions with each other. And I'm so glad that there's this cast of characters, because it was really helpful to refer back to learn more about the characters. And maybe when I go back to reading Ingrid Persaud's novel, I'll make notes of the characters and different aspects of their lives so I can keep them straight in my mind more. But I found that really useful. But the central character of the novel is Campbell, who is an art historian and like kind of cultural critic and celebrity pundit, who comes from fairly humble background in Scotland, but has worked his way up into the upper echelons of society, and so he takes on all of these expensive commissions, writing commissions, some that are quite like ridiculous, for like perfume companies and writing for fashion houses and writing fashion articles. But he's also written a serious art history book, but he has also written a book that he expects will be much more popular, which is called, I think it's called Why Men Weep in Cars. And he's published this as a kind of like ghostwriter, where he's found somebody to be the front, to pretend to be the author of this book, this nonfiction book, because he doesn't really want to be publicly associated with it, but he thinks it'll earn him a lot of money. And he is somebody that is struggling with debt, so he really needs more money, but he's got caught in this kind of hamster wheel that the more money he earns, the more money he spends. And so he lives in a very affluent square, which is just off from Caledonian Road in London, which is near King's Cross area. And so for my book club, I made a whole video showing footage of this whole area in Caledonian Road itself, to give readers who aren't familiar with London or don't live here like a sense of what being on this road is like, and what the road looks like, and what this whole neighborhood looks like. And Andrew O'Hagan said is in interviews how he really wants to create this kind of Dickensian novel, which is it's really like a social satire of our current times in this country, of many different levels of society, and a lot of the corruption that exists, and a lot of exploitation that is occurring, especially for migrant workers. And so that is really strongly portrayed in the novel, but also the absolute hypocrisy of some of the upper levels of society, but also how there are individuals and all different levels of society that are really trying to work for effective social change. So he does demonstrate all of that through many different subplots in this story, and how they all gradually interconnect with each other, how there are gradually all connections between these characters are shown. And it is really fascinating how it does that, and it makes a compelling story. Like the way he writes about it, it's often quite funny and cheeky. Some parts are more emotional, and and it's quite like biting how it's looking at the overall society as a whole. But I think it's also through this character of Campbell making us question our own privilege and what we ourselves are like turning a blind eye to, and how we might be, involved in things by the choices we make that we aren't fully realizing, and but also how we are also interconnected in this way that it's almost impossible to extract ourselves from this. So there are some notable characters, like a student of his named Milo, who wants to be a kind of whistleblower, and but also like extract himself from all of this kind of like corruption and of workings in society. But also Campbell's daughter wants to do the same thing, and so it shows the consequences of that, but also how Campbell is at this kind of crisis point in his life. And I found it really effective as a whole, but I found, some characters more convincing than others, and some storylines more convincing than others. And so some of them felt slightly more cliched than others, though I know the author did a huge amount of research into this. And I found it really fascinating as a kind of like snapshot of our society at this time. And I felt like he did really follow in that kind of Dickensian tradition. So it'll be really interesting if in 100 years' time, if this novel will be read as a kind of snapshot of the world today, and especially England today, and especially London today. But there was also so much pleasure for me in reading this novel, since I have lived in London for a really long time, so I was familiar with a lot of these areas, so could really picture them, and it gave me a really different view of the city and the politics of our time, since Ender Hagen is also a journalist, and it felt like a lot of these storylines could be like a dramatization of a lot of the popular news stories that we see being portrayed today. So thought it was a really interesting book. I was highly expecting it to be listed for the Booker Prize, but it wasn't. I'm sure Andrew O'Hagan was expecting to be listed for the Booker as well, but unfortunately he wasn't. I also read the novel Our Hideous Progeny by C.E. McGill, and this novel is set in the mid 1800s and follows the great niece of Dr. Frankenstein from that famous novel. And she herself is a scientist. She does a lot of sketches and drawings for scientific articles because her husband is a scientist, and but she wants to make a name for herself, and so we follow her as obviously at the time women in the profession of science weren't as well respected or taken as seriously as men. So we see her struggles in that, but how she also wants to continue in her great uncle's footsteps and continue on with because she only knows bits and pieces of his story and what happened, but how he brought someone back to life, or kind of pieced someone back together to bring an individual back to life, and but she wants to do so through a creature, and it's so this is the hideous progeny of the title. And it's so fascinating and gripping how this comes about and following how this story plays out. So in the very beginning, we know that she is being questioned by an officer, and that some dramatic event has occurred, and we only gradually find out and build up to the time of what actually happened. But we also get a lot about her emotional life, how she's been very far removed from larger society and social acceptance, and her complicated feelings about her own gender and sexuality. And it's really fascinating how it explores that. So there's this whole emotional side to the novel as well as this kind of gripping and kind of creepy and gothic plot that's occurring through it. So I read this because it's been shortlisted for the Wilbur Smith Adventure Writing Prize, and yeah, it's a novel that I'm so glad that I probably wouldn't have read otherwise. So yeah, that was a real pleasure. I also read the nonfiction book, The Diaries of Mr. Lucas, by Hugo Greenhalgh, and who has compiled the diaries that he literally rescued from the trash after a man named Mr. Lucas died, who was a civil servant who was quite like uptight and you know, fairly like respectable on the surface, but at nighttime and in his personal life, he would frequent gay bars, and he would hire rent boys to spend time with them and to take photos of them, and it follows. He kept diaries for a really long period of time, for I think around like 60 years or so, which was a really crucial time and he died in I think 2011, and so yeah, this was a really crucial time of social and political change, and there was lots of changes in the law to do with sexuality during that time. So it gives this fascinating snapshot of this period of time, and so the author has edited his diaries and is focusing mainly on the period of the 60s, because this was the period of really rapid social change, and so yeah, it's a really interesting insight into that period of life. And Mr. Lucas himself is a very conflicted individual who grew up having a strong Christian faith, and sort of how that battled with his own feelings of sexuality, in that he felt very, you know, confident in his desires, but not so confident in how that could be expressed, and how he didn't feel like I don't think he felt like he could develop any strong personal sexual or emotional connections with men, that it all had to be sort of transactional or occur in kind of the shadows of society, because that's what he had been raised and built into thinking, and this was like so much a part of his consciousness that he couldn't really break out of that. And he had also been persecuted by so many different people, and so yeah, just sort of felt like very like he didn't really like fit in anywhere, so there's a real tragedy, I think, at the center of this book. But I also thought it was really interesting how Hugo Greenhalgh interjected his own experiences into this, how his time, obviously circumstances were very different from Mr. Lucas, but how there are some things which haven't really changed over time about gay life, but then there are some things that really have. And so I thought that was really interesting and mostly effective. I know some readers of this book didn't find that as it didn't work as well. And I read this as part of my physical book club, and yeah, we had an interesting discussion about it, and there were very different opinions about it again. But overall, I thought this was really valuable and interesting, like, piece of social history. And then I read a couple of novels from the Booker long list, and one unintentionally. So while I was on holiday, I did read the novel of Headshot by Rita Bullwinkel, and I made a whole separate video talking about this. So and Enlightenment as well. So I'll only discuss them really briefly. But yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised by this novel, even though it's about sports and boxing, which I don't naturally have any interest in. I was really drawn into the stories of these different girls, I think, because of the manner of the narrative as it like moves between their different mindsets and their the consciousness of these different young women as they're competing in this tournament, in the Daughters of America contest occurring in Reno. And yeah, I think I just really enjoy this kind of storytelling where you get like little pieces of what the girls are thinking and feeling, but not their direct thoughts. It's more this kind of like Virginia Woolf of just kind of flitting through their consciousness and getting impressions of their life and and expressions of their inner being, and how they're evolving and changing over time, and how this tournament is a kind of like symbolic of how they are trying to form a sense of self. And we get little pieces and snapshots of what happens to them in the future. But then there is the overall tension of who is going to win, because we follow these girls as they go head to head in this contest. And yeah, I was really gripped to know like what was going to happen, and through each stage of the competition, who was going to be knocked out and who was going to be the finalists and who was going to win. And it was really interesting following them, and how for some it was like meant a lot more to them, and for others that this was just a kind of interest that they'd kind of fallen into and they didn't care as much about. But yeah, I felt like it was really like symbolic as a whole of the state of young women in America today, of facing this, of dilemmas of how to exist in society, and how to forge their own way in the world when there is a lot about the society that's not supporting them in the way that it should. And so, yeah, I feel like this novel has a larger meaning than, just the immediacy of the story in this competition. And finally, I read Sarah Perry's novel Enlightenment, and maybe it was because I wasn't feeling so well last week, but yeah, I didn't love this novel as much as I should, and or as I was hoping to, because I thought I would just really fall for it, because I was a big fan of Sarah Perry's previous novel, The Essex Serpent, and actually in the year that it was published, I was a judge on the British Book Awards, and The Essex Serpent was one of the novels nominated in the category that I was judging, and actually all of the judges that I was working with, we were unanimous in picking The Essex Serpent as the winner, and so yeah, I was a really big fan of that novel, and I'm a really big fan of reading about astronomy and the cosmos in general, and watching programs about it. And since this at the center of this novel, it follows a comet that is traveling across the sky, and a reporter and writer who has been told to write an article about this comet, and this sparks an interest in astronomy in general for him. And so I thought I'd be really into this book. I thought it'd be right up my alley, or right up my telescope. No, that doesn't sound right. But yeah, yeah, as a whole, it just I thought there were some parts of it that were really beautifully written, and some characters and some interactions, and some scenes that I thought were quite effective, but I just didn't feel a strong attachment to any of the characters, and I thought the plot was slightly jostling as it went along. So yeah, it just unfortunately didn't work as well for me. But I know some readers have absolutely loved this book, but I also have heard a lot of criticism about it. So yeah, I'm not sure about its chances of being shortlisted. It'll be interesting to see what the judges make. So those are all the books that I've read, or that I'm currently reading in July. But like I said, I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts about any of these books, if you've read them, or if you're interested in reading any of them now. Please let me know about that in the comments below, or anything else you've read recently that you've really enjoyed and want to let me know about, or maybe that you want to warn me away from. I'd love to hear about that. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.